Hi, all. I'm TT Neal, talking to you about more storytelling, genre conventions, etc., specifically talking about fantasy, because that's what I got on my mind. So there it is. I alluded to it on my last post, but theory of magic is so critical when you're doing fantasy work. Theory of magic matters. It's a critical component of world building. And ultimately, what that means is, how does magic work in your world? When you're doing that, you have to have a sensible formula, weird as it sounds, for how magic works. Because magic, it's too easy for magic to just be whatever you want it to be. And narratively, that's weak sauce. So you have to have rules of magic, a theory of magic, to be able to credibly make a fantasy world. And it's interesting because magic is critical to fantasy stories. It's a fantasy story without magic is just a historical fiction tale, whether you've got it in this world or another. And if you don't have that ironed out, you're kind of put yourself in a perilous place. Now, for my own Sagas of Earth series, I sweated that a lot. I wrote out copious details in terms of how magic operates in the world. And for anyone who's read those books, they can see that there's magic being used. But there's there's little clues and touch points, I think, that I put in there for readers to understand, okay, there's this and there's this, and how does that play out? I won't throw any spoilers out in terms of how and why magic works in that world. But I did give a lot of thought to it. I wanted it to feel functional, credible, not overpowering necessarily in terms of derailing the mechanics of the story, because that's always a big risk where magic is involved. Magic can uproot everything because it's magic. In Lord of the Rings, Tolkien very much, what I would consider, he very much nerfed Gandalf, because it would have been too easy for Gandalf to have completely torn apart that story. He had to manage the problem of Gandalf in Lord of the Rings because of his magic. In my own stories, I allow for a role for magic, for sure. There's different schools of it. There's different ways of approaching it, depending on one's cultural traditions. Again, there's that culture that comes into it. But it is very necessary. You cannot simply make magic as anything goes or whatever you want. Very Deus ex machina, right? You don't want to do that with regard to magic in a story. Which is funny because magic, by its very nature, is intended to allow one's will to be manifested in the world around oneself, at the very heart of the matter. But you need to have, part of the theory of magic for me is the idea of there are certain rituals and whatnot that can accomplish the magical objective, and there are certain tolls. My magic characters are very, very prone to nosebleeds. There's a lot of nosebleeds, for that, because if they're encountering a very heavy expression of magic, it's not taking place in a vacuum. So characters who are magically sensitive might actually experience that, or characters who are really putting it out there magically there is a physical toll in that. And so I use that as a little bit of a signpost for, there's some magic being used here. Someone's using magic. Somebody somewhere is doing it. And those who are sensitive to it can feel the effects of it. Or those who are carrying it out will feel the effects from it. And they can't necessarily just throw zaps with impunity. There has to be a bit of giving and taking with regard to that. And I think that makes for a more honest magical system than one where somebody's just simply snapping their fingers and getting what they want. I think that's not as satisfying narratively. So, theory of magic is critical in any kind of fantasy story worth its salt, in my opinion. Cause and effect, curses, etc., items, artifacts, all those good things. there have to be rules that can be exploited, but there have to be rules that the knowledgeable can tap. And you can have people with a natural affinity for magic, whether or not they've been schooled in it. And there's also those for whom a great deal of learning is undertaken in the practice of magic. I certainly did that in my Sagas of Earth books, where there are some more wild magical folk who can tap into things on a more offhand basis, and then there are also scholarly types who are absolutely regimented in their exploration of magic. And I laugh because there's a little bit of and I've referenced this before elsewhere, there's that idea of like writers who just write pantsers, right from the seat of their pants, they just write, versus outliners, writers who do a lot of outlining. In my head, I always think, well, that's kind of like the distinction between the scholarly wizard or sorceress and the more natural talent in like a witch or something like that, for somebody who didn't study this stuff but has a natural affinity and ability for it. Anyway, even those examples show why a theory of magic is really critical if you're going to do any world building in fantasy, because once you have that theory of magic in place, whatever it is, however you get there, because it's your own efforts, once that's in place, then it allows you to go through the story effectively with that knowledge in the back of your head, because well, this plus this equals that. And so it gives you opportunities to apply the magic practically in the context of a story without it disrupting the narrative elements of the story. So I love magic. Magic's fun. Even the word magic is fun. It makes for interesting stories. And having a magic theory or a theory of magic is really a vital tool for any creator doing world building in a fantasy realm.